Hello and welcome to the Phuket Stories podcast. I'm your moderator, Saigon Steve. On this recorded podcast, we'll talk with service alumni who were stationed at Phuket Air Force Base in Vietnam and talk with them about their experiences. Today's podcast is pre-recorded, but you're invited to participate on future podcasts by emailing your contact information to PhuketStories@gmail.com. That's PhuketStories@gmail.com. So let's get started with today's Phuket guest. We're talking with Ron Fletcher, who was an F-4 pilot at Phuket Air Force Base in Vietnam. Hi, Ron.
Hi.
So you sent us an email telling us you had some good stories, but before we start with the stories, I wanted to get a little background from you. In what year did you join the Air Force?
I was commissioned ROTC in 1966 from Texas A&M.
And you were commissioned to fly aircraft?
Well, no, I was qualified and I went to pilot training, and they eventually agreed I could fly aircraft.
So how long did that take in flight school?
It was a year long.
And did you start out on jets?
Yeah, I was one of the many young second lieutenant pilots that got put in the back seat of F-4s by the Air Force.
And what?
Several years before they figured out that you could probably get a navigator to do that job, and they wouldn't be quite as anxious to steal stick time from the pilot.
And what Air Force base was the training taking place?
Pilot training was in Laredo.
Okay, so how many years were you in the Air Force before you got orders to go to Vietnam?
Well, I thought I was in the Vietnam pipeline when I checked out in the back seat at George Air Force Base in California. But that was right after the Pueblo incident, and they diverted a whole bunch of us to Japan. So my first assignment was a backseat pilot in Japan, and I volunteered to leave there early, upgraded at MacDill, and that's when I got to Phuket, summer of 1970.
So the Pueblo incident was in January of 1968. I know that well because my unit was called to active duty for the Pueblo crisis. So you were flying in 68.
Well, it was 68. I was checking out at George in the back seat, and all of us who thought we were on our way to Vietnam, a bunch of us ended up in Japan instead in the post-Pueblo buildup.
So let's go through the calendar here. The Pueblo was in 68. You were flying F-4s in Japan in 68, but you didn't go to Vietnam until you didn't go to Vietnam until what year?
1970.
So why did it take basically 2 years to go to Vietnam from the Pueblo crisis for you?
Well, I went to Japan on a 18-month tour and left early, and I had to go back through F-4 school again to get upgraded to the front seat. That was the spring of 1970, so 2 years after I checked out in the back seat. I was back for 6 months to check out in the front seat.
So tell me, John, what was it like when you flew into Phuket? What was your feeling when you landed at the base?
Well, I had orders in hand at MacDill to go to Ubon, and I was looking forward to that. And I got a call from a sergeant over at the CBPO. Said if I were you, I would leave town no later than tomorrow. Otherwise, I might have to tell you about the change in your orders. And so I got out of town in a hurry, and thought I was still headed to Ubon because they hadn't caught up with me yet. And while I was out on the nature walk in jungle school in the Philippines, a guy from the CBPO in the Philippines chased me down on the jungle walk and said, "Captain Fletcher, we've got some order changes for you." So instead of going to Thailand, I ended up C-141 to Da Nang, and then some kind of in-theater transport down to Phuket.
Probably a C-130.
Yeah, probably.
So what was your feeling when you got off the plane? Let's assume it was the C-130, and you got off the plane, you looked around, and what was the first thing that ran through your mind?
Oh, I probably, it's just kind of nice, but sure is a little place. And that very first night, they put me up in, transient quarters, which was the hooch on the far outside of the officers' village up on the hill. And so I was in there with another transient. I can't remember whether he was going or coming, but he wasn't another pilot. And that night they had one of those recons by fire on the perimeter fence closest to where I was. And so I jumped off of my bunk and tried to roll under the bed and figure out how to put on a flak vest and a helmet under the bed, and said, this is going to be a long, long year.
So when you say fire, were you talking about mortars, rockets, or a sapper attack? Which was it?
Oh, just automatic weapons that just, they kind of rotate around the perimeter, I guess, with the security police that get a chance to just shoot to their heart's content for a while. And it just happened to be in the sector closest to where, and I was on the outside building, having no idea how much room there was between me and the perimeter fence. I learned later that I wasn't right on the fence, but I didn't know that at the time. So it's going to be a long, long year.
What's it like to get the orders for your first mission to fly over enemy territory?
Well, it had been a while since I flew at MacDill, so I was kind of looking forward to getting in the air again. Seemed like my first mission was just, flying around the local area with, I guess it probably was my flight commander, an instructor pilot, just to make sure I still remembered how to take off and land. And then the second mission was a strike mission in Cambodia. Went over on the south bank of the Mekong River to a fortified fighting position that looked an awful lot like a nice little village with tile rooftops. I was assured it was a fortified fighting position, and so we bombed.
So what kind of ordnance did you use?
Oh, we had 500-pound slicks, 12 of them, a couple of us, so 24 500-pounders.
Describe what the Flix bomb does when it explodes.
Oh, it just has a regular tail on it, as opposed to the ones that have the fins that open up, the snake eyes.
So while you were flying on your first mission, or your second mission, I guess, where you were really dropping bombs, was anybody ever shooting at you while you were up in the air?
Oh, I'm sure they did every time I flew, but most of the time you didn't see it. Sometimes they were using tracers and you could see them. And sometimes they actually got so close that it looked kind of like you'd flown through a flock of hummingbirds or bees.
So I guess your heart's racing when you've got tracer bullets coming at you, right?
Well, it depends on whether they seem to know where I'm going next.
I mean, you were
got shot at a lot, but never got hit. It was, I'm sure, at least 1% skill, and the other 99% was probably luck.
On your mission, I guess it ran through your mind, what am I going to do if I have to bail out, if I have engine problem, or I do get hit? What's going to happen to me when I go to the ground, because there's not a lot of friendlies down there, right?
No, the FAC always gave us a heading to bail out if things got bad. So I'm sure he told us which direction to go to get as far away as we could get. But like I said, lucky enough, I never got hit.
You told us you had a bombing mission across the Ashal Valley. Can you tell us about that?
Oh, well, actually, the bombing mission was a single ship, middle of the night, as dull as it could possibly get, a sky spot mission where a radar sight down on the ground tells you turn left, turn right, pickle now. So it was about as boring a mission as we ever flew. But on the way back home, we had plenty of extra gas. And the guy who was the wing weapons officer at the time had been talking to us about being creative about doing mischief with the bad guys. And he cited the fact that the Germans put sirens on the Stukas so they'd make that horrible sound when they were dive bombing. Said, just, use your head, see if you can think of something. And it was just before the crack of dawn, and we had plenty of gas, and we were up by the DMZ, and I said, well, gosh, why don't we just do a low-level supersonic run down the middle of the Ashaw Valley and wake those guys up? And that's what we did. Supersonic, low-level, through the middle of the Ashaw Valley right before the crack of dawn, which used quite a bit of the gas we had left. So we climbed back up to altitude and checked in with the command post at Phuket, and they said, well, the field is closed for fog. And I looked at the gas gauge and said, this is not good. So we went to, the best maximum range altitudes and airspeeds. And as we passed over Phuket, it was severe clear, except there was a fog bank from Quy Nhon moving up the valley, and it was halfway up the runway. So we were landing to the north, so the south end of the runway was closed below minimums, and the north end of the runway was severe clear. And so I asked the tower, well, couldn't I just land downwind? Seemed pretty safe to me. And they said, nope, can't do that. So we had to keep on going to Cam Bay. And I didn't flame out taxiing in, but there wasn't much gas left. It was my one and only trip to Cam Bay in a Phantom.
How many air miles is it from Phuket to Cam Bay?
Well, I can't remember. It's somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 nautical miles, I think.
So how long did it take you to get there in time from Phuket to Cam Bay?
Oh, it was probably another 20 minutes, 30 minutes.
Was that the standard alternate base?
I think I asked Cam Bay if I couldn't land downwind, and I think they told me no. Just do a straight in from the north and land to the south, but I think they made me go around and land to the north.
So was Cam Bay always the alternate landing base for you if you had to go somewhere other than Phuket to land?
Well, it was the logical one since I was already at altitude and headed that direction. There was Da Nang, and I'm not sure whether Chu Lai was still open then or not.
So when you were up at the Ashaw Valley, how far is the Ashaw Valley from Hanoi?
Oh, it's in the western side of South Vietnam. It's one of the primary infiltration routes from the Ho Chi Minh Trail coming into the country. And it had belonged to the bad guys, I guess, for the whole war.
So it was closer to Cambodia, you're saying, right? Is that correct?
Laos. It was far enough north. It was just east side of Laos.
I assume you were there for a year at Phuket, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, August to August.
So did we have, at that time, did we have orders that we could go into Laos to bomb, or is it a secret mission?
No, I'd say close to half of our missions were over there because that's where the Ho Chi Minh Trail was.
I thought you couldn't fly over into Cambodia, that it was the Viet Cong or the NVA would fight in Vietnam and then go over the border because we were not allowed to go over into Cambodia in the early parts of the war. So I was wondering if in your time.
No, when the American troops went over to Cambodia in the spring of 1970, that all changed. We could bomb in Cambodia. We had to be extra careful not to hit any culturally significant sites. And of course, it didn't take the bad guys long to figure out that if I put up the guns in the culturally significant sites, I could shoot at will. We weren't allowed to bomb those.
So normally when you're flying an F-4 on a mission, are you flying with other aircraft or is it just you going solo?
Oh, we almost always flew in pairs. That single ship middle of the night sky spot mission was the exception. We normally flew in pairs, and we almost always worked with a FAC.
And did you come close to ever having a time where you thought, I may have to bail out, or maybe so low on fuel I'm not going to make it back? Any experiences like that while you were flying, or was everything pretty much by the
book? You
book?
already heard about my one almost out of gas story.
Right, but did you have any other close calls?
Oh yeah, I was in Laos over by Chapone, which is infamous amongst fighter pilots. One day, and I got an electrical fire in the cockpit, and I thought, well, I might have to jump out, and this is really about the worst place to jump out, isn't it? It was my radar scope was catching on fire right in front of my face, and so I told my backseater, who had control of the on-off switch, to turn off the tube, and he said, "Huh?" And that was just one "huh" too many. So I think I yelled something unkind at him, and he turned it off, and we headed directly shortest distance to the South China Sea, hoping that when the fire got too bad and we jumped out that we would be over water. But the fire went away. Fire went away when he turned off the radar. I did write it up when we landed. Told maintenance they need to take a look at that.
Now, when they gave you missions, did they try to give you the same aircraft every time, the same tail number, or is it just a luck of the draw?
Just the luck of the draw. A lot of our sorties were off alert, and they had a mixture of birds from both squadrons, cocked and on alert. So we just flew whatever we were assigned for the mission, or whichever position we had on alert, whatever airplane was there. I think on regular missions, we normally flew one of the birds from our own squadron.
Were most of your missions nighttime missions or daytime?
Oh, the majority were day missions, but there were a lot of nights.
So could you see?
In fact, on alert we rotated with the other squadron, midnight to noon, noon to midnight, and every, I think it was 2 weeks, we'd swap. And so the guys that weren't on alert were on the flying schedule during that same 12-hour time frame. So rotating days and nights.
So when you're doing a night mission and you're flying over enemy territory, do you see any lights down there with electricity, or is it torches, or what's going on down below visually?
Oh no, they were pretty good at making sure we couldn't spot them. The facts going lower and slower, probably if anybody saw anything, they would see them. But no, we couldn't. The one big difference at night was you could actually see them shooting at you.
But it was always ground fire, right? Did anybody ever send up a SAM up against your aircraft?
Well, I swear they did that to me one night. It was another one of those humdrum, all by myself, single ship sky spots up by the DMZ. And this time we weren't working with the Air Force controllers, we were working with the Marine controllers. And they were really nitpicky, turn left 1/2 of 1 degree, change your airspeed 2 knots. And so I was intently flying instruments trying to keep that Marine off my back when my backseater said to me, "What's that?" I said, "What's what?" He says, "That thing over there." And I looked over there, and it was actually, it ended up being 3 of them, multi-stage, and the second stage had a bright, seemed like it was a blue light, just like the SA-2s you see in the films. There was the booster, and then there was the main rocket, and they were coming from inside or just the other side of the DMZ. When I got down, they put me on the BAT phone, and I talked to the folks down in Saigon, and they absolutely positively insisted that they were just unguided rockets.
How do you avoid being hit by a SAM? Is it a maneuver or is it a jammer?
you
Which is
just-
it?
Oh, well, we didn't have jammers. I went down and got fast because we were, flying awfully slow when we were doing those medium altitude drops with the radar sights. So I was going pretty slow, and I didn't have much speed to maneuver with. So I went down in a hurry and got fast and turned south. And then we could see, behind us at altitude, the explosions in the air behind us. But it didn't matter how well we described it on the bat phone to those guys down in Saigon. They insisted that couldn't possibly be true, that we were supposed to believe them and not our lying eyes.
So when you were assigned a mission, do you always get the same navigator, or is everybody just in rotation? And also, once again, the luck of the draw.
It wasn't quite the luck of the draw, but it was not always the same guys.
Because I assume when you have two of the same guys all the time, you two work as a team. You almost know how each other's thinking, right? And how each other's reacting. Whereas you have a new person each time, it's a different situation.
Yeah, well, that's the way everybody would like to have done it. It just, for one reason or another, never seemed to quite work out that way. You had one guy or a couple of guys that you flew with more than most of the rest, but normally it was people from your own flight and your own squadron.
So how many total missions did you do in Vietnam?
Oh, somewhere around 200. I only count 175 of them because they were actual combat missions where the other guys got to shoot back. The leg out and the leg back in while going to the Philippines, I never counted, although they show up on my flight records as combat.
Well, I thought there was a number that if you did so many missions, that's it. You flew so many, and then you didn't have to fly anymore.
Yeah, that was when the guys were flying over the north all the time. 100 missions, and they were done.
So it was unlimited for you.
Yeah, it was just to do your 12 months and catch your freedom bird.
So what was it like for an officer being at Phuket? I was enlisted personnel, so it's a whole different world, as you know. What's it like? I understand that you. I say this complimentary because you deserved it. That the officer stayed in air-conditioned barracks. Isn't that true?
Yeah, we had little low one-story buildings and with outside walkways, and there was a door between your room and the guy on the other side. And between the two of you, one of the rooms had the refrigerator and the other one didn't. And just a single bed. Our living quarters were nicer, but your food was much better.
Well, we don't begrudge you having.
Time we ever went to the officers' club was to drink and play fighter pilot games.
We don't begrudge you for having air conditioning because you guys risked your lives flying out of the base where we had the perimeter and security police and the Koreans guarding us. So when you're putting your life out on the line like that, you really deserve the air conditioning. So what else can you tell me about your days at Phuket? Did you get to go up to the Mars station and call home?
The only time I did that was when I didn't come home on time. We actually had our names painted on our airplanes, and when it came time, we didn't know that it was the drawdown because they hadn't told us that, but we started giving airplanes away to the wings over in Thailand, and it was time for my airplane with my name on it to go to Thailand. And so they said, well, why don't you take it over to Yubon and drop it off? And so I did, with my backseater who had his name on it as well. And then we went down to Bangkok, and like most GIs, we just had a hard time catching a hop back in country. And when I got back, I found out I had missed the date for my end of tour urinalysis. And they wouldn't let me go until they got the lab results back. And so I got involuntarily extended. Think about it for a minute. Going to the Mars station, and talking to your mom for the first time and try to explain to her why you're not coming home on time.
Because you haven't peed yet, right?
Yeah, I'd peed, but the results hadn't come back from Saigon. So, yeah, it didn't matter what the flight surgeon who lived with us told him about. Well, I know him, and he doesn't do drugs. He probably drinks too much, but he doesn't do drugs. That was not good enough. They had to get the official results back from the lab in Saigon. So I can't remember exactly how many days I got extended, but I do remember I was not very successful explaining that to my mom over the Mars.
Did the F-4s have the parachute when you landed like the F-100s did, or is that not done on the F-4s?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So what happens if the parachute doesn't deploy? What happens? Did you run off the runway if it doesn't deploy?
Well, if the runway's long enough, not much of anything exciting. If the runway's wet or not very long, it can get kind of exciting.
And you also had to dump any ammunition that you didn't use on the mission before you landed back at Phuket. Is that correct?
It depended on what we were carrying. Some of the things you could safely bring back. Some of the stuff you could never, ever bring back. We were one of the few bases that had the thin napalm full of riot control agent that they used in SARS. And we weren't allowed to bring those back. If one fell off on landing, then it would have been a mess.
Ron Fletcher, were you aware that Phuket was one of the main storage bases for Agent Orange? Did you know that?
I know now. I didn't know at the time.
Well, none of us did, I don't
They
think.
didn't bother to tell us. They didn't bother to tell us about that. You know, I had three roommates at Phuket, and two of the three have had cancer. One died, and the other one survived. So we were able to check out the kind of cancer he had, and sure enough, it's on the AO associated cancer list. So 2 out of 3 roommates. So 50% of us have had cancers, and one for sure, and probably both were Agent Orange related, and all we did was just live there.
It's been a long time since Phuket, but now you can go on to Google Earth and see a satellite view of the base. Have you ever done that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And it's strange to see the revetments, and that's about all that, and the flight line, that's about all that is still there that from the old days.
I heard that as soon as the Americans left, the locals came and stripped everything except the slabs for the buildings. But the wonder arches they couldn't take. They're still there.
So I always ask the people when I'm interviewing, did you go R&R when you were at Phuket? And where did you go if you did?
Yeah. Went to Sydney. My roommate actually delayed his R&R so the two of us could go together at the same time down to Sydney. And we went down, and we were really looking forward to all those Aussie women in all those mini skirts that we had been seeing. And we got down there, and it was spring in Vietnam and fall in Australia, and the newest trend was maxi skirts.
Bad timing.
Bummer. Bad timing.
Well, I had the choice of going to Hawaii or going to Australia or going to a place called Penang, Malaysia. Not a lot of people, I think, chose Penang, Malaysia, and that's the one I picked. It was an interesting place to go, but because it was also a shorter trip to get to Penang, Malaysia than the other two places.
Yeah, I ended up with a few days of just regular leave in Singapore. Went down on the base Gooney Bird. We go down there on the supply runs, and the same thing, a few days in Hong Kong on the base Gooney Bird, making a supply run, just 2 or 3 days at a time. But my R&R was in Australia.
So recently now, do you still think about Vietnam and Phuket and your time there, or is it just ancient history and never crosses your mind? Which is it?
No, I'm still in touch with several of the guys that were in the squadron at the time, and I made the last 12th TAC Fighter Wing reunion in Tucson, I guess 2 years ago this spring. We were supposed to have one at Wright-Patterson at the Air Force Museum this past spring, but it was slipped because of the virus and rescheduled for late October, but I think they're trying to reschedule it again sometime in 2021. Most of the guys in the association are well over 65, and most of us have got comorbidity problems as well. So they're trying to slip it into 2021 now. But if I'm able, I'm definitely going to make that one.
So,
at the Air Force Museum. I haven't seen that one Air Force Museum since early 80s, I guess.
So I guess it's kind of a thinking that fighter pilots are like Tom Cruise in Top Gun, right? Or they and when they get out of the military, that they all become commercial pilots. Does that happen to you, or is that something different?
A few of my buddies did. I wasn't at all interested in being a glorified bus driver. I ended up being a college professor instead.
What were you teaching?
Government.
So you never even went into general aviation and took up a plane for the fun of it?
Oh, you know how expensive a hobby that is?
That's interesting because, you have all this training, and mostly the pilots love to fly, and they'll find a way one way or the other. And you talk to some of them, and they say, I never went back up again. That's interesting. It's like teaching a surgeon how to operate, and when they get out of the military as a surgeon, they don't operate it anymore. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's just too expensive a hobby, and being a college professor, I couldn't afford that.
Tell us about things that happened in the O Club that we enlisted people did not get to see.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we would go over there rarely. We almost never go over there to eat. We'd ride the shuttle bus and go eat at your chow hall. It was so much better. And then the chow hall had a satellite out at our alert shack. And since we don't alert so much, we ate there a lot, same food. I think the only thing I ever ate at the Officers Club was a hamburger steak, and I might have had a total of a dozen in a year. Usually we go over there because there was some kind of a show that some ladies that were singing "Rolling on the River," and or we just go over there because it was a partying occasion, welcoming new guys or sending off some senior officer. And we'd normally have a little bit more than too much to drink and start playing fighter pilot games like carrier landings, where they would put some tables together and wet down the tops, and you'd run, jump, and slide on your belly down to the end of the table and try to hook a chair or something with your feet so you wouldn't go off the end and land on your nose.
We didn't have that game at the NCO Club.
No. And sing fighter pilot songs.
So there's a camaraderie with fighter pilots, right?
None of them are suitable for mixed company.
Right.
I don't know. They probably had to do away with fighter pilot songs when they started having women fighter pilots.
But a fighter pilot, it's a special breed of cat, as they say. It takes a certain personality, a certain skill to do that.
Yeah, Top Gun was a pretty hokey movie, but one thing they nailed almost dead perfect was the attitudes of the guys.
Cocky, right?
That part was real. That part was real.
Would the word be cocky?
Yeah.
Confident.
Yeah, confident. There were very few fighter pilots that weren't confident. And we thought those we knew those guys were dangerous.
Well, Ron Fletcher, it's a pleasure talking with you. Thank you for taking the time to talk with us on Phuket Stories. Thank you for your service.
Well, thank you for yours.
Well, that wraps up another episode of Phuket Stories. If you'd like to participate in a future Phuket Stories podcast, email your contact information to PhuketStories@gmail.com. That's PhuketStories@gmail.com. Until next time, thanks for listening to the Phuket Stories podcast. I'm Saigon Steve.